lights are clapping too. And they stopped. We'll see if that happens again at the end. Aberrant Cycle, the piece you are about to hear, is inspired by humpback whale songs. You may be familiar with some of the keening sounds of humpback whales from media such as Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the scene in Finding Nemo where Dory attempts to talk to a passing whale, or perhaps a video such as 8 hours of whale sounds deep underwater for sleep and relaxation. That was the first video to come up when I searched soothing whale sounds on YouTube. However, real humpback whale songs contain a huge variety of sounds, ranging from at or below the bottom end of human hearing to around 20 kilohertz, our uppermost limit. Beyond this fantastic range of sound production, though, humpback whale songs appear to have a deeply ingrained hierarchical structure. As it is commonly analyzed, this structure consists of 5 nested layers. The lowest layer is the unit, which is classified as a short burst of sound that we perceive as continuous. Some groups of distinct units will repeat along a general pattern. For example, approximately 3 of one type of unit will be followed by 2 of another type of unit. This repeating structure is referred to as a phrase. Phrases will repeat some number of times, with each repetition of the phrase being a little different. A group of similar repeating phrases forms the third level of the hierarchy, called a theme. Several distinct themes will follow one after another before looping back to the first theme in the group. This group of themes is known as a song. Finally, there can be several individual songs in a full song cycle, which is the period during which a humpback whale is singing. One song can be as short as 8 minutes or longer than 30 minutes, and full song cycles have been recorded lasting as long as 23 hours. Though there are critiques of this hierarchical model used in the field of cetacean research, it is nevertheless a widely used method for discussing the features of humpback whale song. This structure served as a primary point of inspiration for Aberrant Cycle. Though I felt that any direct imitation of the sounds of whale songs would not hold up to the real thing, I wanted to explore the structure that many do not know underlies these incredible vocalizations. Both of the primary movements you will hear, the vortex and the hidden sea, are each one full song from a 3-part song cycle. The light likes that. Due to time constraints on the rehearsal period, we will not be performing the second movement of this set of 3, which is why you only see the numbers 1 and 3 in the program. The 2 movements approach this structure in very different ways. Though each has the same basic units of sound, they approach these units differently. This is an application of another principle derived from my research into humpback whale song: continuous variation. Across the course of a given song cycle performance, a humpback whale will progressively morph the sounds they are making, often in directed ways, where a unit from one theme becomes a unit from the next theme over time. After the performance of the piece, I will discuss more specifically what this variation looks like in the context of each movement. For now, though, it suffices to say that the 2 movements have quite different approaches. One final note before the performance begins. The name Aberrant Cycle is also drawn from my research. Humpback whales in the same population sing essentially identical songs in a given time period, a phenomenon we will discuss more later. When there is an individual whale that does not follow the population trend, the individualized performances they give are known as aberrant cycles. Now, this is likely obvious, but I am not a whale. I'm also not attempting to be a whale. What I'd like this piece to do is explore the space between what we know about humpback whales and the mysteries of what we do not know. Though this piece uses the structure of humpback whale songs, it is not like anything that an actual humpback would sing. It is an aberrant cycle. Please enjoy, and hold all applause until the end. not done yet. Though I wanted to present Aberrant Cycle to you as something of a mystery, I'd like to pull the curtain away now and talk about some more considerations that went into the creation of this piece. If you're not trained as a musician, don't worry. I will avoid any technical descriptions of harmonies or compositional devices I used. To begin with, I'd like to talk about the differing approaches of each major movement. As you heard in the performance, the vortex and the hidden sea come across very differently from one another, despite having broad similarities in musical material. The guiding force behind this is summarized in the table included on the third page of your program. As I was finishing the primary research phase of this project and moving into the planning stages for composing the music, I realized that much of my research indicated an interesting phenomenon. When one aspect of a humpback whale song is more complex, other aspects tend to be less complex. An example of this can be seen in research done by Payne and Linda Guinet, which uncovered the fact that the most complex whale songs tended to have pairs of themes with identical beginnings or ends to their respective phrases, something very much akin to rhyming lines of poetry in humans. I synthesized this idea, along with other phenomena described by Payne and Eduardo Mercado, into the concept of hierarchical variation balancing. As it works in Aberrant Cycle, hierarchical variation balancing results in one level of the whale song hierarchy complexifying, while the others simplify to keep the song as a whole from getting too intricate. I decided to explore each possible permutation of this by rotating through which level of the hierarchy within the song, so that's unit, phrase, or theme, would be most complex in each movement. Though this concept is inspired by the research I did into the structure of Humpback Whale Song, this specific version of complexity balancing is something that I saw no reference to in the literature I read. Ultimately, my goal was to create a piece that was grounded in scientific examinations of humpback whale songs, yet still free to develop into a compelling piece of music without being constrained by what we do not know. On that note, there is much we still do not know about humpback whales and their songs. It has been known for quite a while that humpback whales live in distinct population groups, that each group has its own distinctive style for constructing their songs, and that each whale in the group sings the same song at a given point in the year. However, things get more interesting. The majority of whale songs occur during the mating season, roughly the winter months of the hemisphere a given population group lives in. This preponderance of songs during the mating season may be due in part to the higher population density during this time, but I did not come across any definite claims in my research. During the mating season, the songs continually evolve, with new materials being added, some old material being removed, and some sections shrinking or expanding. However, all whales in the population appear to participate in this process at the same rate, with no one individual taking a leading role. In other words, the song of a humpback population group appears to evolve at the level of the group itself and not at the level of the individual. This is complexified even further by the fact that when two humpback whales are singing at the same time, they will not necessarily sync up to one another so that they are both at the same point in the song. Rather, they can continue to sing their specific group song at their own rate, regardless of any nearby whales that may be at entirely different points in their own song, in the same song. And yet, even with this desynchronized process occurring, the group song continues to evolve at the same rate and in the same way for each individual. And again, no one whale appears to be leading this change. It is unclear what mechanism is guiding this process, and this presents a significant gap in our understanding of humpback whales. In addition to this, humpbacks do not seem to spend much time singing outside of the mating season. While they do vocalize, these specific, structured vocalizations that we know as songs do not occur very much outside of the mating season. At the start of the next season, a given group's song is very similar to where it left off at the end of the previous mating season. And this song then continues the process of changing over time. Another gap in our knowledge is related to the fact that almost exclusively, only male humpback whales have been observed singing. In my research, I only came across one somewhat ambiguous reference to a female whale singing. Though all humpback whales vocalize, again, it seems that it only tends to be males that display the sustained pattern vocalizations that we call songs. This led early researchers to propose that humpback whale song fulfills a function in the species mating process. However, no instance of male-female mating has ever been observed in humpback whales. What is more, Eduardo Mercado has observed that a male humpback singing is much more likely to attract other males than any females. Specifically, when humpbacks hear a recording of another humpback song, they also tend to swim away from rather than towards the speaker playing the song. So what these two things point to is that the view that the function of humpback whale song being related to mating is currently no more than speculative. More evidence is needed before any conclusions can be drawn. Well, there are other interesting theories for the function of humpback whale song, such as one that suggests it could operate in a way similar to sonar as a means of navigating unfamiliar ocean environments or potentially locating other nearby humpbacks. Any such proposal maintains a similarly inconclusive position due to insufficient evidence. Therefore, as it stands currently, both the function of whale song and at least some of the processes that govern its evolution over time are unknown to us. Now, I wanted to share this information with you, though I am not a trained scientist, to spark your interest and imagination in the puzzles at the heart of research into humpback whale songs. I find it deeply compelling that there is so much we still don't know about humpbacks and their songs, particularly with so much uncertainty regarding the function of humpback whale song, and yet the clear level of complexity that these songs exhibit. I think a question that occurs to many people is whether or not these songs communicate something, particularly if they have a semantics parallel to human language, or perhaps human music. I do not have an answer to this, and issues immediately arise in asking such a question when you try to define the particular elements of music or language that you would look for in humpback whale songs. However, my goal with this piece was not to answer this question, but to encourage my audience to ask questions along these lines, interrogating the assumptions and unknowns in our understanding of humpback whales. As a source of inspiration for your own questions going forward, I'd like to read a short quote from James Bridle's 2022 book, Ways of Being. Where we start to move forward is when we learn to ask questions which are less concerned with, are you like us, and more interested in, what is it like to be you? In the spirit of listening to humpback whales on their own terms, there is one final thing I would like to share with you. Roughly 3 minutes of an actual humpback whale song, recorded in Glacier Bay National Park in November 2020 by the National Park Service. After we listen, I will open the floor to any questions you'd like to ask about Aberrant Cycle, or humpback whales more generally, though I will include the caveat that my knowledge of the research into humpback whales is inexhaustive, and the goal of this composition was using scientific literature as a starting point. Thank you all so much for listening and engaging with me today. I will now start the recording by cueing Andrew. Take it away. that's that. Thank you. I'd like to open the floor to questions now. I'm sure people are curious about some things. You're also welcome to come down to the front if you have questions. I have a mic set up so everyone can hear you.
I have two, Theo.
All right.
With your composition,
Mm-hmm.
the movements,
Yes.
did you choose the title for the movement and then design your music with that in mind?
That's an interesting question. So those were all chosen after the compositional process was over. And I debated titles for a long time. And so specifically, I had working titles for each movement. And there were 3 words. The first movement was disruption. The second movement was distortion. And the last movement was transmutation. So those verbs really gave a lot of sense of action and a general sense of guiding the kind of transformative processes that I was going to be using in the piece. I talked to Professor Feller about this, my composition advisor, and we ultimately came to the conclusion that somewhat scientific-sounding language would maybe distract from the emotional engagement of the listener. I didn't want to put people into an analytic frame of mind when they were approaching this piece. I wanted people to come in still thinking in an emotional lens and having an emotional reaction to the piece. So the working titles are near and dear to my heart. They guided the first draft and they guided the second draft of the piece. But those titles that you see in the program are meant to evoke those verbs in a more poetic way.
Before I ask my second question, your hidden C.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that composition, the playing of that, the design of that, really made me feel a hidden C. I love that. My next question is for some of the ensemble. Okay. I wondered, coming from old school, okay, myself, thinking about the first time you saw this music, sight read, and then thinking about how you played it, how does that compare with sight reading a classic, like a Mozart or a Brahms or Haydn or one of those? If somebody would address that, or more than one of you, just curious.
So, at least for me, rhythms have always kind of been a point of contention, even in my classical sight reading and performance. And so, looking at Theo's piece, I was admittedly a little daunted by some of the rhythms in there, since it was so unconventional to the ways of the music I was accustomed to. But in the context throughout both the Hidden Sea and the Vortex, and even the first portion of Movement Zero, listening, it made so much sense contextually that it was able to flow into my playing very easily. And when I first sight read everything with it, I initially did not use a metronome because I wanted to get a sense of how the rhythm would even just work in the way of my natural pulse, because they were so detailed. And then once we were trying to get the ensemble to be very precise, then it became more precise in the way we use the metronome. But it kind of flowed from a sense of natural pulse into precision. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Other comments? Somebody else?
I'll offer something out, I suppose. I think it reminds me of Tran and your subjectivities. I think I, as a player, found this piece very challenging, but not in the sense that we would consider something like a Mozart or Brahms challenging. A lot of the difficulties, when you think of difficult in classical music, I think often the association is something that is very physically demanding or technically demanding. And what I found to be so challenging and also rewarding about this piece is that it's very, you have to learn how to play cohesively and in sync with everybody else. And it's not so much about, from a simple perspective of this isn't that rough, but in terms of having to shape something with all of the rest of the ensemble and with Theodore and like listening to him as a conductor, that was what was very difficult about this. So it's one of the things that like I found I actually couldn't practice this very well on my own because it's hard to do it on my own. I can play all the scales, but what's difficult is where most of the real practice is he's sitting with everybody, sitting with Theodore, and thinking, okay, like who am I going to have to watch, and how are we going to subdivide this measure, and how are we going to really make sure that we can shape something that's this kind of like abstract, but still has this underlying superstructure. And so it's about protecting that superstructure with everyone.
Thank you.
And I could provide a little insight from my perspective onto this. To Elijah's point about rhythm, a lot of what I was going for compositionally was an organic feeling, something I think you probably heard in the recording that I played. This very free, unmeasured sense of just progression, not directed, but moving. And I really wanted to capture that, and bar lines of definite length and fixed tempos, set to a metronome, don't really capture that feeling. So a lot of blurring and stretching and bending was necessary. And then to Sam's point, my goal was for the ensemble as a whole to represent one whale singing a song. So since there's just such an immense range of frequencies and of timbres that a whale is capable of, no one instrument is really capable of doing that. Even the piano doesn't have the top end. I mean, really none of the instruments we have the uppermost, right up at the topmost part of human hearing. Piano cuts off, I don't know the exact numbers, but below that. But even throughout the range, there's these different expressive abilities of whales. You'll hear these sliding things, so I knew I needed strings for that ability to pitch bend. But you also hear these very percussive, very rich sounds that don't have a definite pitch, but are just low and rich and dense. And then I was like, yes, marimba. So yes, my goal was really to have the ensemble work together cohesively, using 5 people to do what one whale can do on their own. Questions over here?
Hi, Theodore. I had a similar question about the instruments that I think you may have just answered in part, but I wanted to ask if you had thought about, given your prodigious background in conducting and composing for choirs, if you had thought about using a choir in this project, or if you were worried that might come across as too similar to Dory and Finding Nemo.
That was a consideration, and yes, that was the Dory effect was something I was thinking about. So I ultimately decided on an instrumental ensemble, and this was very early in the process, because I think that voices are just intimately connected to humans. It's our voice. And there's a level of abstraction available with non-vocal instruments that you don't have in the human voice. So that's ultimately why I decided specifically instrumental versus vocal, and then made further decisions about timbre based off of what I said before. Mm-hmm.
When the composition moved from being on paper or a collection of electrons on the screen into being in human hands and on acoustic instruments, what surprised you?
So I composed this using a piece of music notation software called Dorico, which is very flexible and has a lot of great capabilities, one of which is not playback of accurate instrumental sounds. It can do a pretty good job, but there's just things that acoustic instruments can do that a piece of software can't replicate accurately. I would say the biggest change was getting to hear the string harmonics in context, so those kind of glassy tones that you heard in the higher range of the stringed instruments. And they really blended very beautifully with the high piano parts, and I think really evoke those higher kind of scooping sounds that you'll hear in whale songs. And throughout, we didn't really have any issues of blend. I wouldn't say. Yeah, ensemble is shaking their heads. Sam went like this. I'd agree. So I am surprised at the extent to which things were cohesive on a timbral level from the beginning. So I think that was very successful, and I'm very happy about that.
First of all, thank you for your performance in the ensemble. I wanted to ask, you listened to whale songs. Were there any parts that, from listening to them, you took inspiration and put it in music, or any other sorts of inspiration musically that somehow happened to apply to what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So I certainly listened to a lot of whale songs at the start of this process. A lot actually being fewer than I would have hoped for. And the reason for that is whale song archival recordings are surprisingly hard to find online. I had to spend a few hours digging on my own, and then I went to the research and reference desk, and we were able to find the one that I played an excerpt of, and then the ones that I included the QR code to with Whale Trust Maui. And those were pretty much the only full whale songs I could find. The issue isn't finding some audio, it's finding whole songs or even parts of song cycles. There's a lot more people who have 1 or 2 minute excerpts available than people who have the full length recordings. And it was frustrating because in my research I'd come across these scientists talking about like, hey, we have 4,000 hours of recordings of humpback whales, and I was like, that's cool, can I see it? And I think if I had had the ability to reach out to some of the scientists, I think they would have been willing to share. But ultimately I decided, the literature and the engaged listening with the source material was ultimately secondary to the piece, and I had to start distancing myself from that. Musically, other music that inspired me, I've been interested in minimalism since taking the composition seminar that the music department offers during my sophomore year, and I think this piece reflects some of that in the sense that whale song uses minimal materials in kind of maximal ways. So I think that is maybe the broadest set of inspiration. Yeah.
Hi. I'm not a music major, so apologies if this.
All good.
Okay, I have 2 questions, one about the music, one's about whales. About the music, I was wondering, you touched on this a little before, but the use of different instruments for different aspects of the melody. I'd be interested to know more about your thought behind that.
Yeah. So something that went into that was getting a good balance of sounds across the whole piece, having different moments where different individual instruments featured and different groups of instruments, different sets of the 5 were featured. So that was a lot of it, and then looking at part of my planning process was creating a kind of pseudo spectrogram of a whale song. So I had looked at a lot of these spectrograms. So that's a graphic display of sound frequency over time, and intensity is indicated by how dark the line is. So it's just kind of a axis like this, and then there's these dark marks on there to indicate where sound is happening and where in the frequency spectrum that's occurring. So I was looking at these and I started outlining kind of what my frequency spectrum would look like over time. So I made these basic units and then I mapped out kind of how I wanted them to be ordered. And then at that point, I said, okay, I have these frequency spectrums, I have this kind of intensity idea associated with each of the units in my piece. How am I going to accomplish that with the instruments that I have? So that was a lot of that. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Yeah, sorry.
No, you didn't ask it, did you?
Not yet.
Okay, that explains it, everything.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Yeah. So in your research about whale songs, was there any I'm a biology major, so I'm interested in. Was there any evidence that whale songs being primarily male had anything to do with intersexual competition between males or communication between them?
There is some research to that effect, but it just appears to be inconclusive. I came across an article, I think in Scientific American, describing something that sometimes happens during the mating season where there's a group of males all swimming together, not necessarily singing. And in fact, a lot of the time when whales are singing, they'll just stay in one spot for the entire time they're singing, not moving. But these pods of males were singing, or not singing, they were moving and continuing to breach, and ultimately it seemed to the researchers like there was kind of a dominant whale selected out of this process, and they speculated that that would be the male whale that kind of has won this particular courtship ritual, and perhaps would be the one that would have the best chances of mating with a female. But there's so much that's unknown.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one more, if I may.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you had much rehearsal time. I suspect not, but the ensemble was fantastic with to put that together. But I wondered, in your rehearsal, did the ensemble help you evolve in your thinking about, or maybe adding something that you didn't add this time? And, now that you performed it, would you be thinking, maybe I should have done this or that?
Certainly, one thing that the ensemble will help me with a lot is notational clarity, which is a big thing as a composer. You want your ideas to be expressed as clearly and as visually legible as possible. And I have some experience with that, but the compositional process necessarily has to be a little bit divorced from that kind of granular detail level. So the time frame for this project was such that I had finished the draft and I came back to Kenyon and I just had to get the music to the performers without really having the ability to make those edits. So as we went along, I would get suggestions and demands as far as things that needed to be fixed. And the piece is better for it, and I think it will be clearer for any future performers.
I think that's the word I was looking for with how did they influence your composition in the future if you choose to. I think that the give and take, and you alluded to that, it kind of demanded something and it affected maybe how your thinking is about the whole composition or part of it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's not funny.
I'll move mine up too if it makes you feel better.
Okay.
Oh, I can't. Never mind.
Do you find whale songs to be beautiful, and has the way you've thought about them changed as you've gone through this compositional process?
I certainly think that when I started this, and I listened to the first excerpt of Whale Song that I could find, I didn't really know what was going on, because I hadn't done the research to really get an appreciation of that structure. But now, listening today, I have done the research and I hear those changes over time, and I've heard this full 20-minute recording, and you really get a sense of this song continually evolving, even within just a 20-minute period. I don't have good words to describe the feeling I associate with listening to whale song. I think that's why I wrote the piece. And that's why it doesn't have words, because I don't know what to describe that feeling as, but it is something powerful. And I will share that, I listened to maybe 6 or 7 whale songs, and you're just sitting there for 10 minutes, 45 minutes, and the sound is just continuously changing and evolving all around you. And it's a really powerful feeling. I always lost track of time, even just listening now. I was like, has it really just been 3 minutes that we've been listening? It was actually more like 3.5, so if that's what you're wondering. I cheated a little bit. But yeah, I listen to them and I just lose track of time. And this is something interesting. Almost every time I listen to a whale song, immediately after, I was like, I have to take a nap. Not because I was particularly tired, but just because I needed quiet time where I didn't have to use words or conscious thought to reflect on the experience I just had. So I definitely think I appreciate whale song more than when I started out. And I find it incredible, and I hope that I've shared some of that passion with you. Are there any more questions? All right, we'll call it a day. Thank you.